Hey guys, back with another guide video, this time on MOC 12's Pollux. Pull Castorice, or the Aeon of Veracity. Thanks for watching. Okay, but seriously, here's what I'll be covering in this guide. Feel free to skip to whatever sections you need, and stick around to hear my thoughts at the end. Pollux is a pretty unique boss, so her mechanics need a bit of explaining. But to give a quick rundown as to what you should do, make sure to bring a healer on your team. This holds true even for most zero cycles, since you'll be fighting an uphill battle otherwise. Memo Sprite users and skill spammers gain an advantage in this fight, as well as blast damage dealers who can effectively shred shared 3 target HP. Break is a bit awkward due to the center toughness bar being locked in phase 2, but it's definitely still usable. At the start of the fight, you want Pollux to leave her damage reduction window and enter Fragrance of Death ASAP, indicated by the purple Desperate Bubble icon gaining 100% charge and changing to pink, and losing HP is how you trigger that. Since this charge is specifically based on max HP loss, you can even run lower rarity or level light cones, unleveled headpieces, or non-tank main stat pieces where possible to accelerate how fast you lose max HP and thus gain charge. Once Fragrance of Death is achieved though, you'll then want the healer DPS to remove said damage reduction and really lay on the hurt. In phase 2, that healing should extend to your whole team, lest you tank a massive nuke with CC attached. Also, if your DPS has a single target skill, target the main head until it has all 7 weaknesses for maximum MOC cycle buff damage. However, if you have more to gain than 160k damage a cycle by weakness breaking a long arm on the side and tapping into that 11% weakness broken damage bonus, feel free to do that instead. As for the best DPS to fight Pollux with, there's Castorice and then there's everyone else. Seriously, even the gap between her and other Chrysos heirs is pretty significant versus this boss. Use her if you have her. That being said, each of the playable Chrysos heirs has an advantage versus Pollux in one way or another, so they're the next best choices. Aglaia has her Memo Sprite and rapid blast damage, Mydei plays into HP drain and has blast skills, and Anaxa has skill-focused damage and ever so slightly faster ramp-up with MOC's weakness implants. Usual shared HP destroyers like the Herda and Acheron should also do fine. Blade is an interesting pick though, as he really loves a lot about this fight. He drains his own HP for faster charge, the Permadot basically acts like a mini Jade for faster follow-ups, and his ult setting into 50% max HP can be saved for when Pollux sets your team's HP to 1. Out of the rest of the High Cloud Quintet, I'm not sure who does the best between Xingqiu, Dill, and Xingyuan to be honest, though Xingyuan has the most variable damage due to Lightning Lord being Blast Bounce. Jade will be performing at 60% effectiveness for the whole fight, and honestly her HP drain from Deck Collector is negligible. Not sure if I'd recommend her outside the Herda comps, but with high investment she does good versus Choir, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same versus a Quantum Weak 3-target fight. Between the breakers, Firefly's self-heal and blast attacks make her the most intuitive choice for this fight, but keep in mind that phase 2 Pollux locks with center body's toughness, cutting her blast effectiveness in half. Since boss bars add 2 Rappa stacks, and the long arms on the side are counted as minions, this also cuts Rappa's effectiveness in half. You'd think Boothill will care the least then as a single target unit, but because break damage scales with max toughness, losing access to a 180 toughness bar and having to settle for 30 toughness is a significant damage loss for him as well. Teek's double break and super break scaling helps him even more than it normally does for this fight. Other hunt units like Fei Xiao, Ratio, and especially Resurgence Lesila will struggle, but if you're just looking for clears, they can get the job done. If your Fei Xiao is E2, you might be able to brute force with the help of Tribby and Robin though. For 4-star options, Qingque with her high quantum blast damage is the obvious choice. The other quantum DPS, Xue, likes having quantum toughness to reduce, so having the main toughness bar locked in phase 2 hurts her as well. Honorable mentions to DOT, as apparently it's actually playable thanks to the benefits Black Swan and Kafka receive from +3 skill levels, as well as debuffs lingering between phases. As for sustains, any abundance will do the trick. Most players will default to Gallagher as good old reliable, or highest seen if you're pulling for a more offensive option. But Lingsha, Poho, and Locha should all be excellent alternatives if your team needs break support, energy, or gobs of healing respectively. Bailu has the highest numbers of the non-limited healers, and on-hit healing is pretty nice too, but her damage reduction might stall your ability to gain charge. Lynx and Natasha should be good enough healing in a pinch. Do not run preservation units versus this fight. Pollux's HP drain and demand for healing to both deal damage and not die mean a healer is basically required, and half or more of her attacks straight up ignore shields and damage mitigation. Again, do not run preservation units, they straight up do not work. The best supports will depend heavily on your team. though with the fight being shared HP and favoring HP scalers, she'll be likely to use Tribby. Her sub DPS is pretty significant in addition to her usual supportive capabilities. Robin also is a great pick for this fight, especially for low cycle clears, since Pollux starts with an invulnerability period that just about matches the time Robin needs to get her ult. Besides being a good general amper, Remembrance MC is also great, since 2 bodies means more damage received, and this is especially apparent in Castorice teams, providing an extra 12 to 15% charge for team-wide heal and HP drain simply by being 2 characters. Sunday is just good because he's Sunday, and the rest of the crit supports, well, depends on your account. As for the break supports, Fugue is by and away the best. Double breaks becomes all the more important when you only have access to 2 to 3 low toughness bars across the entire fight, and Pollux is slow to recover. Harmony MC's imaginary toughness is great, though it being bounced can lead to some consistency issues, and even premature breaking if run with Firefly. Still immensely valuable for the super break scaling, if nothing else. Rame's comparative value isn't as high, with not as much toughness to shoot through and other sources of weakness break efficiency dampening her contributions, but realistically, you'd want E1 Fugue and possibly also E1 Tribby before considering removing her from the team. This MOC's buffs are really interesting, and understanding how both of them work is pretty important for clearing as fast as possible. Skill level 3 and Memo Sprite skill level plus 2 sound like a big deal, and they are a significant boost, don't get me wrong, but since skill and Memo Sprite levels pass their E0 caps of 10 and 6, add slightly less scaling, adding plus 3 to skills is about a 15% final increase in value, while plus 2 to Memo skills is about a 20% final increase, being slightly lower for E3ified units with higher skill levels. Keep in mind that for supports, this doesn't always translate to a 15 to 20% final supportive increase, especially since some of their skills, like HMCs and Xiao Chou's, don't have support buffs attached to them. As for the extra weakness implants, they work similar to Anaxa's in that they don't reduce enemy res. Unlike the usual implants though, they are permanent and do not disappear. This means that as soon as you apply 7 weaknesses, any attacks can damage toughness, assuming it isn't locked of course, and you get the full amount of true damage procs at the beginning of each cycle, no extra maintenance needed. This translates to about 200k on Pollux. I would recommend focusing implants on the main body if your skills are single target, since all of this damage comes from true damage procs on Pollux herself. The long arms themselves are coded to have basically no HP, despite being part of a shared HP boss, and thus the true damage procs against them hit for nothing. 500 damage is laughable. Oh, one other thing. Weakness implants count as debuff applications, so Ratio can have 4 debuffs at base with just MOC buffs on every single target, meaning that he doesn't have to run an Nihility character anymore. Also, for Acheron, it doesn't really matter too much unless you're running like RMC or something, but it's cool I guess. Here's a quick list of how much plus 3 skill levels, or in RMC's case, plus 2 Memo Sprite skill levels, benefits their supporting capabilities. Tribby, Fugue, Topaz, and RMC are the biggest winners due to the sheer numerical value of the buffs they gain, with Kafka and Sparkle coming close, since increasing their scaling is always nice. If you're using Hunt March in this fight, keep that 1.2% extra speed boost in mind by the way. It might mess up or enable certain speed tunings without you realizing. Okay, with all that context out of the way, let's address the dragon in the room. Pollux, Netherwing Husk, Fairy of Souls is our first Wave 1 only boss. Think Apocalyptic Shadow format. She also starts with a whopping 90% damage reduction, and is our second 3-target share HP boss after Choir, which is really funny if you think about their legacies. In total, she has 2.72 million HP per phase, but with her self-damage, it's more like 2.4 million in practice, as we'll see soon. Pollux also flies at a decent 190 speed, but it will feel much slower in practice, and its main body has 180 toughness, while the long arms on its side have a measly 30 toughness. All 3 targets are weak to Quantum, making it your best bet versus this boss, with Wind, Imaginary, and Lightning all tied for second place with 2 out of 3 targets being weak. That being said, between this MOC's free implants and only having 20% elemental res, going off element isn't that big of a deal. All of Pollux's attacks inflict hastened death, which is an unremovable DOT status that hits for like 200 to 600 damage each turn. It can't kill, so it's not that threatening. In fact, it's good for gaining charge on Pollux and for HP drainers in general. Most of Pollux's attacks deal atrophy damage, mainly if targets are over 50% HP, but also when she sets your HP to 1. This damage ignores both shields and damage redistribution, so yeah, no preservation allowed. Okay, so obviously we need to get rid of that 90% damage reduction. How do we do that? Well, at the beginning of each phase, Pollux keeps tally of HP loss as that spread bubble, indicated by a dark purple icon. Your team needs to lose a collective total of 222.222% max HP to bring this up to 100%, at a rate of 0.45% charge per 1% max HP, at which point Pollux immediately reduces everyone's HP to 1 via inflicting 100% max HP as non-fatal atrophy damage, aka can't kill and goes through shields and damage reduction. Besides memo sprites, your team's HP is getting set to 1. At this point, both long arms get delayed by 200%, and Pollux enters the Fragrance of Death state, indicated by a bright pink icon. This state is active for 60% of Pollux's HP, or about 1.63 million, and gives Pollux 10% speed, adding 5% more at the end of each turn. That being said, Pollux's next action gets delayed by 100%, so yeah, you honestly don't have to worry about her being the next Thule. You'll have plenty of time to heal off everyone being at 1 HP. All characters that were hit also receive the Indulging Slumber state, which allows them to finally start working on getting rid of that pesky 90% damage reduction. Memo sprites just skip this step and get to deal damage right away. Very fun if you're one of 4 Memo sprite users in the game. Anyways, the more HP you heal in Indulging Slumber, the less damage reduction you receive, scaling up to 50% of your max HP, at which point Indulging Slumber disappears and you deal full damage. Fragrance of Death also helps a bit, since every percent of HP you deal while Pollux is in this state heals your team for 0.5% of their max HP. Don't count on this as your only source of healing though, as it's a 45% team-wide heal at best and you need to shoot through several millions of HP to even get it. Once you deal enough damage to bring Fragrance of Death down to 0% though, the team gets healed for 100% of their max HP, Pollux loses 12% max HP and her speed buff, and her next action is delayed by 100%. This means that Pollux in effect only uses 88% of her max HP at most per phase. So to sum up how to get rid of Pollux's 90% damage reduction, lose a lot of max HP to enter Fragrance of Death, maybe even by making your character squishy on purpose, then heal back up to 50% as fast as possible. Another way to lose max HP, of course, is to rely on HP drainers. So how much charge do they contribute? Castorice, of course, drains by far the most. Her technique drains 40% of everyone's HP, so an instant 72% charge, then instantly summons Netherwing who can use 3 or more breaths to bring this charge to 100%. Yeah. Her skill can also add over 2/3 of the charge meter by itself, while her enhanced skill adds as much as 90% charge, assuming all allies are at full HP. Very fair. Mydei, Blade, and Firefly can all drain double-digit amount of charge in a single instance, meaning that they can potentially hit 100% charge earlier, but it's not 0 AV early, and you'll almost certainly have to wait until after Pollux's first turn to hit it. That being said, after Pollux's first turn, anyone that was hit received Hasten Death's DOT, which adds anywhere in between 2 to 6% charge per ally turn, depending on how squishy they are. So in combination with these HP drains, or even by itself if you're lightning fast Aglaia, spamming enough turns afterwards can potentially let you hit 100% charge before Pollux's turn too. Arlen, Jingliu, and Jade unfortunately drain HP in much smaller amounts, so outside of like Sunday Robin shenanigans, you'll probably have to wait until Pollux's second turn, like all the other DPS, to hit 100% charge, even when factoring in the extra charge from Hasten Death. Okay, so let's look at the attacks themselves. Damage calcs will assume your character has 1000 defense, so you might take more or less damage depending on your bulk. Thankfully, Pollux's mechanics are most of the fight, so her attack patterns are simple enough. On turn 1, she uses to slay the Fallen, a single target attack for about 1150 damage, which instead becomes 400 plus 15% max HP worth of atrophy damage if your character is above 50% max HP. This is followed up by Tamorn's Departing, which drains 30% max HP from 3 random characters as atrophy damage. On turn 2, she uses to Bury the Slumbered, a shared AoE attack that does 3000 damage across your team. In other words, if your team has 4 characters, they each take 750 damage. But if your team has 5 characters, like 4 characters plus a Memo Sprite for example, they each take 600 damage. They might not take the exact same amount of damage since this damage still checks against individual defense stats for each character, but yes, more characters equals less damage per character. Characters above 50% HP take this damage as atrophy damage. This attack is followed up by Bitterness delivers belated evil news. which enhances one long arm for 3 of its turns and advances it by 100%. By this point, most teams should have triggered to die in aromatic pain to unlock Fragrance of Death and start dealing damage. Turn 3 is to mourn the departing, followed by to bury the slumbered, after which Pollux restarts his 3-turn attack pattern. The long arms are pretty simple, with the left arm attacking immediately after Pollux and the right arm starting with 30% delay. Technically, you can force the left arm to attack first as shown on the right, since it and Pollux are speed tied, but it's not like that really ever matters. The long arms always attack with the Living Shank Flea, a single target attack for 600 damage. If they are enhanced by the effect of Bitterness Delivers Belated News, they instead deal a blast attack for 400 damage to everyone, or 200 plus 5% max HP as atrophy damage against targets with over 50% max HP. Between their low damage and not doing anything else, these tentacles aren't threatening at all. In fact, you might want to deliberately avoid breaking them so they deal damage faster for more charge. Going into Phase 2, it's just a repeat of Phase 1, except this time Pollux's next attack after to die in aromatic pain is Death Wishes for more death. As far as nukes goes, it is very non-threatening, dealing 30% of everyone's max HP as atrophy damage. Characters that have Indulging Slumber take 45% max HP instead and have a high chance to be entangled. Considering that the condition for removing Indulging Slumber is being at or above 50% max HP, yeah, it becomes an almost guaranteed one-shot for slumbering targets. Luckily, this condition is really easy to meet as long as you run a healer, which is why this attack isn't really that scary. This attack also gets cancelled if you dispel Fragrance of Death before Pollux gets to move, so yeah, there's that too. So what do I think about this boss? Well, for one, it's a 0-cycler's nightmare, unless you're running Castorice, but it's a casual 5-cycler's paradise. Most optimal 0-cycle strategy outside of Castorice involve non-max leveled light cones, squishier relics, and E2 units in order to meet the HP loss and damage checks with sustain. This means that if you're a good player and max leveled all your important light cones, you might have invalidated certain 0-cycle rotations for yourself, since that means you don't have a spare level 1 signature or DDD lying around. Breaking your account by making permanent upgrades to it is never a good feeling, and while I like the concept of artificially lowering your HP, implementing it like this without a take-back option really sucks for the 0.01% of players this matters for, and I'm being serious this time. It's actually pretty similar to the dilemma of leaving RMC skill and talent unleveled for easier mem deaths and thus easier 25% RMC advances. Sure, it doesn't affect a lot of people in reality, and most would see only upside from maxing those levels, but it still sucks that there's no way to take back leveling upgrades for those that want to pursue these painfully RNG but potentially optimal strategies. Also, 2 shared HP bosses on both sides of MOC, not the greatest time to be a hunt main, I can't lie. At least they're still brute forceable with good enough single target and smart enough play. That being said, my real issue is how badly Castorice is shielded versus Pollux in multiple ways, while even her fellow 3.0 units only get a portion of those advantages. It's common knowledge, and I've touched on it here and there, but let me break down just how shielded Castorice is. 1. She has the highest self-HP drain in the whole game, which lets her unlock Fragrance of Death at 0 AV, while other DPS have to wait from anywhere from 1/3 to a full cycle. This is why Castoreless 0 cycles are so hard, because most of your damage has to happen in less than 50 AV, and you usually have to run a sustain. 2. The massive team HP loss upon unlocking Fragrance of Death gives Castorice about 60% charge, sometimes more. No one else gets that much benefit, with only Mydei coming close, since he at best gets 1 Godslayer, but at worst pops his action advance when entering Vendetta too early. 3. The massive team healing upon breaking Fragrance of Death also gives 60% charge with RNC on the team. I mentioned before how RNC having 2 HP bars with them and Mem is beneficial for Castorice teams, but man, I find it pretty suspicious that this interaction favors Castorice's free-to-play support option over the premium one in Sunday. Perfect if you care about cost, I guess, which totally won't be used to push low-cost agendas. Also, that's over 200% charge from 4 stage mechanics alone and counting. 4. Pollux's damage mostly scaling off of max HP is also an interesting choice, letting Castorice teams stack HP sky high without having to worry about losing charge. Mydei once again benefits from this interaction at least. 5, but if you think Mydei gets away scot-free, not quite. He's not a memo sprite, so he doesn't get to instantly ignore the 90% damage reduction upon entering Fragrance of Death. Oh, but other memo sprite users exist, right? It's not that bad, right? About a third or more of Aglaya's damage comes from herself, so she still faces a significant penalty. Brute force is possible at higher investments, at least. DPS RMC is a meme, and while Hyacinth can do damage, she is still a healer first and foremost at the end of the day. And guess who Hyacinth's best partner in crime is? And finally, 6, the fact that Fragrance of Death heals you per damage instance. It's the same exact thing they pulled last MOC 12 and AS Hulei's Withered Tree buff. You're getting an extra Netherwing Breath where otherwise you wouldn't be able to. Sure, I guess the healing per damage instance helps multi-hit new characters like Aglaya and Fei Xiao maximize their output ever so slightly, but we all know who the real beneficiary of this interaction is. It is actually absurd that the litmus test for how well a DPS does versus Pollux is how many traits they share with Castorice. Shilling new DPS is fine, but making older DPS perform this much worse is not. 3.0 was only 4 months ago, and the conditions for fast clears have already changed so much to the new gen DPS's beck and call. Just because we're somewhat primed to expect it at this point, doesn't mean that this is okay, and I really don't like how this rapid change has led many to believe, sometimes incorrectly, that DPS are just automatically dead on rerun. Also, keep in mind, and this might sound contradictory to the point I just made, zero cycling Pollux with Castorice is a baseline. Heck, there's even a zero cycle with E0 S1 Castorice, Pella, RMC, and Gallagher. Who needs other limited units, am I right? Meanwhile, doing it with any other non-3.0 unit, even with their E2, is an accomplishment. People have started figuring out zero cycles with the other Chrysos heirs at E0, sure, but those rotations usually demand deliberately incomplete builds specifically for Pollux and have limited supports to aid them. I'll admit, the gap is closer than I initially thought, but it's definitely not a level playing field. And just to reiterate, zero cycling is not Hoyo's way of balancing the game, but I do find it concerning that for players who do chase meta, the standard for what feels good rises with every patch. E2 the Herta, 0 AV cleared AS Bananas with just her S1, plus E0 S0, Argenti and Jade. Then we got E0 Anaxa, 0 AV Hulei with 0 limited Eidolons. And now with Pollux, not only are newer characters clearing faster, but older ones are forced to play slower. Hopefully the community will treat this boss for the anomaly that it is, and that they'll be justified in doing so. All this to say that the standard for shilling characters based on boss design has gotten higher and higher with each passing patch. Even Trivian or E1 dropped around the same period as the new Pure Fiction changes with a bulky center boss, plus boss-only damage reduction with MOC Nikador, Reaver, and AS Aventurine. Honestly, this makes Choir look somewhat okay by comparison. At least that boss is just a fire and imaginary break check, not a single unit check, and we have plenty of AoE ways to brute force it now besides. Despite all this, I do like how Pollux is an easy fight with any healer. Out of all the recent bosses in memory, Pollux's sustain requirement is by far the lowest, with low damage turns, lots of self-inflicted action delay, and no CC if you have a half-decent healer on the team. I also don't even mind the meta being shifted in favor of abundance over preservation, since Lynx is free and Gallagher is universal. It's also worth mentioning that if you're trying to just clear in 5 cycles, there's actually a lot of options. Pollux only locks her center toughness bar in phase 2, and only for the equivalent of 2 turns, so break is still usable. Debuffs lingering between phases and the extra skill levels help DOT even if the boss itself isn't particularly fast. In fact, Black Swan likes outspeeding enemies to build up Arcana stacks. Blade loves this fight for many reasons, even pre-Hyacine, bringing him back up with the rest of the blast units. Even Ratio gets an unintended boost by no longer being shackled with Nihility for 100% follow-ups. The MOC implants are his debuffs. And with Hyacine being a DPS and a healer package, any team that uses her will find Pollux much easier, much like how Trivi trivializes Nikador and Reaper matchups for many characters. But please Hoyo, don't ever re-implement 90% damage reduction that's attached to a boss's own turns, unless you pull exactly one specific unit that also benefits in a million different other ways that is so blatantly misrepresentative of their average gameplay. It's scummy game design and basically all of us know it. Well, if you made it through all that, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is easily one of my most in-depth boss guides to date, and all the keywords unique to this fight certainly contributed to that. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your MOC clears if you haven't done them already.